Due to the abysmal handling of this terrible attack against the Lebanese people, both in terms of the aftermath, emergency responses by the government and leading officials, and the investigation, I thought I'd talk about Beirut's explosion, especially since I was about 1.74 kilometers from the blast zone, and surviving the shockwaves from the blast was unlike anything I've ever experienced, and losing a place that was also like my second home was very devastating. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to analyze the shockwaves in this new series about Unearthing Lebanon in hopes that people can visualize or better understand what hundreds of thousands of people experienced that day. I dedicate this video to all those affected and for everything and everyone they lost on that day. Hi, I'm Omz and welcome to OmzLaw. Today's analysis will be based on the research done by forensic architecture. It should go without saying that a lot of people have put hours and hours gathering and assessing this information. Therefore, I highly recommend you check out their work on their channel as it delves deeper into this atrocious crime. And yes, it is a crime against the Lebanese people, and the way the investigation is being conducted at the present moment clearly indicates that this act was deliberate. And if it isn't, then basically everyone in power has an IQ of negative 300,000. That's the amount of lives they destroyed with their negligence and stupidity. But let's not sidetrack. We're only here to discuss the shockwave and how it was felt around the city. By examining this map by the Red Cross, we're going to start off by analyzing the different effects that are possible. Obviously, everyone in the red zone would have experienced the strongest impact, but I have to call attention here to the types of buildings in Beirut, which are an atrocious mixture of old and modern buildings intertwined together, with urban planners, architects, and engineers rarely taking into account the types of designs that could work together or could represent Beirut. But the point being, some buildings are very old and some are very new, so we do have a variety of effects here. But we're gonna generalize for today as much as possible. Looking at this map, you can immediately notice that the east and southern side of the city took a lot more impact than the western. This is mainly due to the grain silos, which shielded some of the capital from the most dangerous effects of the blast. The computational fluid dynamics blast study of the 2,750-ton ammonium nitrate explosion shows the blast wave unfolding around the harbor asymmetrically. The video, produced by Will Holy, Ian Bruce, and Julia Aboud from engineering firm Arab and Christopher Sterling, the developer of the simulation program Viper, demonstrates how the explosion emanated east and south of the epicenter. It hit Beirut's district with the force of a magnitude of a 3.3 earthquake, killing at least 154 people and injuring about 5,000 others. 300,000 were also displaced, by the way. At first glance, one would assume that we're looking at a single shockwave. But actually, there's three, as all of this pressure is traveling through three mediums: the air, the sea, and the ground. And by slowing down this footage inside of Adobe Premiere, we can see exactly what is happening. Forensic architecture estimated the start of the explosion to be at 6:08 p.m. and 18 seconds. To simplify this as much as possible, we're going to be speaking in more film terms, so bear with me. Also, if I accidentally say deceleration instead of acceleration, please forgive me. And for those who don't really know the difference between the two, acceleration simply means the change in velocity, while deceleration is more of a layman's or common term that's meant to imply a loss in speed. But these two aren't the same thing in the scientific community. On to the film terms. Every second contains 25 frames per second, or 29.97 if you're in the States, and I can't really explain why there's a discrepancy without spending the entire video on it. So for Lebanon's sake and Europe and a lot of other countries, we're gonna stick to 25 frames per second, but since most of the footage was shot in 24 frames per second, we're gonna be using the cinematic frame rate instead, meaning there are 24 images passing in front of your screen right now, every single second. And that's going to be our unit of measurement for now, so let's analyze this video. To keep it simple, let's assume the flash is the start of the explosion, occurring at exactly 6:08 p.m., 18 seconds, and 0 frames. At roughly 10 frames, the camera shakes a bit, but if you look at the video, the shockwave we see doesn't arrive until about 2 seconds later, at about 6:08 p.m., 20 seconds, and 3 frames. Why is this happening? Well, this is actually a basic law in physics, whereby waves in their various types travel at different speeds in different mediums. So, for example, sound travels faster in water than it does in air and faster in a solid than it does in a liquid. We are witnessing the same phenomena happen here. A shockwave is generated when energy is suddenly released or deposited in a material. That could be a gas, liquid, or solid. And the energy here will travel in the ground faster than it does in the sea or in the atmosphere, almost 2 seconds faster, by the way, if we are considering this camera as our reference point. What makes this slightly complicated to analyze is that the speed of each wave will vary as they propagate away from the epicenter. The wave traveling through the air would slow down faster as it encounters several buildings and objects that absorb this energy. By using forensic architecture's video, which was taken from stgeorge's hospital, which is located about 906 meters from the explosion, we can get a clearer picture of how this tiny difference in the speed of the waves saved the lives of many. Being about 960 meters from the hospital, so I was basically double the distance away, I could testify to the time difference between the waves. We all felt an earthquake first, followed by a loud bang, glass shattering, screaming, destruction of all types. If you look at this other video from inside the hospital, we can see the objects and the people reacting to the earthquake seconds before the shockwave traveling through the air arrives. If we sync up this footage to the previous one by using the dust entering here as our metadata, we can see that the earthquake does in fact occur at 6:08 p.m., 18 seconds and 11 frames, almost the same moment as the previous video. We can see even the people reacting to the earthquake prior to running and the arrival of the shockwave. So for people anywhere underneath the 1 kilometer zone, those differences would have been almost negligible, and the destruction they had to endure was much more severe than everywhere else. They would have little to no warning that something was heading their way, while everyone outside of this zone who had seen the flash would have had seconds to react. Even for those like myself who had not seen the flash, felt the earthquake seconds before the shockwave, allowing us just enough time to move a few meters away from the windows or doors. Obviously, not everyone was so lucky, but I know the people I was with are. And from the countless stories we've heard so far, so many people were lucky that day. This got me interested with the time difference I experienced and how many seconds it would have been. In order to do that without drowning myself in physics equations, which, let's be honest, it'll be impossible for me to do without simulating this with all the buildings involved, we're going to have to use a simpler approach and use other videos to extrapolate the solution. Looking at this video near Pearl Gallery and this other one near Beriska restaurant, both of which are around 1,230 meters away from the epicenter, we can narrow in on the difference. I'm going to sync up the videos at the moment whereby the destruction is seen, then change the reference point to the earthquake. By then synchronizing the footage, we'll be able to see the difference in frames. Stgeorge, being 906 meters from the explosion, experienced about a 40 frame difference between the earthquake and the shockwave, while the wedding videos being shot in downtown have a 57 frame difference. That's a 17 frame difference, almost 3/4 of a second between the two videos. I was about 1,740 meters from the epicenter, so maybe some cross multiplication would help here, but since the waves are traveling at different speeds and are accelerating in unpredictable ways due to Beirut's terrain, I guess this is inversely proportional to the distance squared, but I can't be bothered to do this on my own, so I've left links for that. But what I can be bothered to do is find another video. So this video is from BBC News, which was taken in their BBC offices. I'm assuming this is the one in downtown, which is 1,680 meters from the epicenter. Might work nicely. Now, a disclaimer here that their center in downtown would have been slightly protected by the silos, as mentioned previously, and therefore the speed might have been slightly lower here, so we're just estimating. By repeating the previous method here, we find that the difference is very interesting. The waves have an 83 frame time difference now. In relation to the videos in downtown, there has been an increase of 26 frames between the waves. That's a little bit over a second, so 3/4 of a second or 17 frames between Stgeorge and the wedding videos, and a second and 2 frames between that and BBC, meaning the waves are changing speed in relation to one another. At this point, I was not able to find a video that could be closer to where I was, but we can solve a few things here with what we have. If the 3 videos from Saint-Georges and the weddings in downtown had a difference of 17 frames after the waves had traveled 324 meters, and the BBC video in relation to the wedding had a 26 frame time difference after the waves traveled another 450 meters, we can see that cross multiplication would have given us a very different answer. In fact, it would have given us 495 meters instead of 450, meaning the change is constantly increasing. That's if the difference in distance was the number we were calculating. So if we're gonna find out the difference in waves in frames from where I was that day, it's just not gonna be accurate. So let's do some conversions. We first need the speed of each wave in each video. In the Saint-Georges footage, the speed of the earthquake measures in at 1977 meters per second. And unfortunately, since we do not have the flashes in the other video, it would be impossible for us to really calculate the speed of the quake. So we're gonna estimate it using another video by Forensic Architecture. This video, almost 1210 meters from the explosion, might help. By analyzing the footage, we get a speed of approximately 1936 meters per second. Yeah, it decreased, which is what we wanted to see, but I wasn't too sure about this result, so I examined another video that I estimated it to be about 2,100 meters from the epicenter. If we sync up the footage, we get a speed of almost 2,000 meters per second. So, yeah, it's supposed to be less, but it isn't. It's very possible that the earthquake was traveling faster in the eastern direction, since a lot of it would dissipate in the silos and the nearby Mediterranean. Also, ground materials and composition could play a factor here, not to mention the different frame rates of the videos, which pose a major issue with actually pinpointing the time. And in this case, 1 frame difference brings this down to 1948 meters per second, which is more like the number we wanted to see. So let's say that the earthquake has a speed of approximately 1977 meters per second at the time it hits Saint-Georges, and is accelerating at negative 41 meters per second squared. Whew, that took a while. Now onto the shockwave. The Saint-Georges shockwave measures in at 426.3 meters per second, more than 4.5 times slower. It's also measuring in slightly faster than the speed of sound, which is 343 meters per second, which I don't think it should, but it could. In the wedding videos, the speeds measure up to 410 meters per second, a slight drop from Saint-Georges, but let's keep going. This other video clocks in at 420 meters per second, so at least Saint-Georges' speed is still higher in both cases. Unfortunately, the highway video doesn't help here, since the shockwave dissipates significantly, and I can't seem to pinpoint the exact mark here, and a single frame can really make a huge difference. So we're gonna calculate the acceleration to be negative 16 meters per second squared. Now we can approximate their time difference, as they arrive to me almost 1740 meters from the epicenter. Knowing the initial velocity and the acceleration, along with the distance between me and Saint-Georges, we can estimate a speed of 1956.8 meters per second for the earthquake, and it took almost half a second to get to me from Saint-Georges. The shockwave traveling at 426.3 meters per second and accelerating at negative 16 meters per second squared, I do think this number should have been larger, would arrive a second after it hit Saint-Georges and would have a speed of 426 meters per second. So it wouldn't have lost that much, honestly, and I'm not gonna go into how I did the calculations here, as it took me an entire day just to revise these. But I've left links to the methods I used, and I know I should have used Pythagoras in order to solve the speed from the epicenter and not the speed between Saint-Georges and me, but this took too long already, and all of these numbers are approximations anyways. So let's put these on a timeline. The earthquake arrives at Saint-Georges at approximately 6:08 p.m., 18 seconds and 11 frames, or 458.3 milliseconds. About 0.492 seconds later, it arrives to me at 18 seconds and 23 frames, or 950 milliseconds. Anyone in my area or above a kilometer from the epicenter would now have felt an earthquake. For those unaware with what's happening at the port, this moment passes by slightly unnoticed, but for some, it was clearly a matter of life or death. For some, this was a warning, either PTSD from the Civil War, which prompted them to move away from the windows and doors, or that it put them on alert. At 6:08 p.m., 20 seconds and 3 frames, or 125 milliseconds, the shockwave hit Saint-Georges almost 2 seconds after the earthquake. and around 1.01 seconds after that, at 6:08 p.m., 21 seconds and 4 frames, the shockwave arrived to me, so just over 2 seconds. To summarize, everyone above a kilometer basically had anywhere between 2 to 3 seconds to react to the earthquake. For me, the experience was something like this. Let me show you a picture, you might remember them. I'm pretty sure you probably know. Was that an earthquake? That was literally my reaction, as I was so fed up of all the garbage we have to go through in this country. Let me know what you guys think and what I could have possibly done better with the calculations. If you were there that day, comment and tell us about your experience. Don't forget to like this video, and as always, thank you for watching. This killed me.